This is a 3-minute message brought to you by Redemption Church, Delray Beach.
Well, in Nehemiah chapter 4, we see something that almost everyone deals with: opposition. Now, you wouldn't think that God's people would deal with opposition. As they're following God, the Jewish people were doing God's work, this great task of building a wall to protect people, to accomplish God's great will for the Jewish people. But yet they still faced opposition. And so too with you and I as Christians. As we follow God and do the things He's called us to do, we still are going to face opposition and have enemies. Now, the Jewish people were being mocked and attacked by their enemies, the Ammonites, Tobiah, Sanballat. But yet we also get attacked by enemies as well. They may have different names, but they're demonic forces, the principalities of evil. Satan himself opposes God and the things of God and His people. And in chapter 4, we see God's people, the Israelites, in this opposition respond in a correct manner to fight opposition. And I think we could learn in chapter 4 ways to oppose opposition, to fight in a biblical way. 4 things. And first thing I see is in verse 9, when opposition arose, they prayed. They prayed. We have to realize as Christians, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but the Bible tells us that we wrestle against principalities and evil darkness, and one of the ways that we fight is through prayer. The second thing we did is we see in verse 14 is Nehemiah told the people to focus on the Lord. They prayed, but then he also encouraged them to focus on the Lord. He says, remember the Lord. Remember who He is, how great, how powerful, how mighty He is, His faithfulness. In opposition, it's so easy to get sidetracked and look here or there, but we need to focus not on the circumstances, but on the Lord and His goodness and His faithfulness. And prayer helps us to do that. The third thing we see in verse 15 is they continued to work. They didn't give up. They kept doing the things God called them to do. You know, Satan only could tempt you to give up and to quit. But the Bible exhorts us to just keep on fighting, keep on battling, to keep on doing the thing God's called us to do. And the people didn't quit. They just focused on God, they prayed, and they kept doing that work. The last thing I see in verse 17 is this: they had an attitude to fight. You literally see them have one hand with a sword, one hand with a tool, building the wall. They were prepared and they were ready to engage in warfare if the enemy were to arise. And we too need to be faithful, to be putting on the armor of God daily, having an attitude of fight, continuing to work, focusing on who God is, and giving these battles over to God in prayer. And so if you're experiencing opposition, don't be surprised, even if you're following God. But may you fight the good fight of faith the way that God has told us to, and the way the Jews did many years ago, all the way read in chapter 4.